Welcome to another episode of Customer Success Talks Real Challenges. Exactly, experts' advice. The podcast dedicated to providing practical, actionable, and digestible advice to those challenges that we go through as customer success managers. We are dedicated to helping those transitioning into customer success and early career customer success managers. I'm your host, Byron Truño, a customer success nerd, passionate about customer success. And one day I was thinking, how can I start learning about customer success without getting confused with all these strategies that people are talking about that for me was like in another language? And after days without sleeping, I came up with this idea of creating a podcast with my old friend, a lovely friend, Nav, who has a pause on the podcast, but hopefully will be soon here with us as well. In each episode, I have been able to have amazing conversations with a lot of people with different stories, backgrounds, challenges, and years of experience. And guess what? Today is not the exception. Today we have with us Jay Sanchez. Jay, thank you so much for being here with us.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here.
You are a creative mind. That's what I have perceived from you since the day that we have been talking and brainstorming ideas and then even created this episode. Jay, you're here to share insights on how customer success managers can use visual resources as a secret weapon to improve customers and organizational understanding and collaboration. Because communication is not only verbally, it's also about reading side of things. And now we're going to see the visual side with customers, stakeholders, and then internal colleagues, different departments, and everything that comes with that. Thank you very much for being here with us, Jay. And there's more. There's more. For example, you started your career as forensic psychology, but it wasn't exactly what you were not reaching your potential, let's say, because you enjoy a lot of art, right? A lot of design.
Yep.
So that led you to change to digital animation. However, now your life, life throw curveballs, and you, thanks God, you ended up in customer success. You have different initiatives. You are a CS leader as well. You are really passionate about fostering diversity, equity, and inclusion, focus on LGBTQ plus and even neurodiversity. Too much. Thank you for being here again. Thank you for your time.
I'm again really excited to be here. I love speaking with you. I've loved all our interactions, and I'm excited when you asked me to be on the podcast. I was like, of course, yes.
That's amazing. And the episode that we're gonna talk, that we're gonna go through today, it's gonna be really interesting because I think it's gonna actually expand more. So probably I'm gonna release these in two parts because we have so much to talk, and you even gonna share your screen and show us visually how you do your things as well. But before we start with all of the crazy ideas that we have, I want to touch a really interesting topic that sometimes we forget or we don't know about. And it's so important to help other people feel comfortable as well and for us to release our potential. And I'm talking about autism. You are an autistic person, and I wanted to learn more about that so you can share that with everyone out there. And I want to know, how is that autism has impact your life as a customer success manager?
Great question. I'm That's also part of the reason why I'm so passionate about neurodiversity because I'm an autistic person. Everything I do, like the world entirely, how I interact with people, it all comes through the filter of autism.
Mm,
So I can't separate that from my person. It's literally how I process everything around me. So I've had some fantastic wins in customer success that I'm really excited about that happened because of my autism stuff, like my pattern recognition and all that. But at the same time, I've also had a lot of struggles. I am someone who, for example, remote work is a must-have for me. I need to be able to control my environment so that I can produce, productive work, efficient work, and high quality work. And being in an office just it doesn't help work. Like
right.
it doesn't help me do that. So yeah, some of as an autistic person, what was funny to me is that I'm what you call a late diagnosed autistic. Um, I didn't know I was autistic growing up. I just thought I was weird. I was a classic bullied kid and everything. I was very alone for a good chunk of my childhood. And then it wasn't until I was well into my adulthood that I started getting that inkling of, there's got to be something. And I
Right.
remember very specifically, I was in a therapy session with my therapist, and I had been in therapy for several years at that point, and I felt like I wasn't making any progress. And I ended up getting very upset at my therapist and saying, like, I need you to tell me what's wrong with me, because you say there's nothing wrong with me, but I'm struggling at work. I'm struggling with my friendships. I'm struggling with relationships. I feel extremely alone. And then on top of that, COVID happened. And I was like, I can't continue living my life thinking there's nothing wrong. There's gotta be something that's being a blocker.
That's your gut feeling talking there.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. And then I started, I have several friends of mine that are also autistic, and we just related a little too much,
Hmm.
I started reading books about autism, and I was a little I was like, no, this can't possibly be it, I was in denial, really. And then when I spoke to my therapist and I started seeking out professional like resources, I found out that my gut was right. I was in fact autistic, and it was a grieving process at first. It was honestly very difficult to process, because I realized that I had spent over 20 something years of my
Wow.
life struggling understanding the world around me, and only to realize that it didn't have to be that way. And so what led me to customer success was very interesting. Is autistic people are usually seen as having a social deficiency, uh, and honestly, I don't experience that very much in customer success. Um, I am very much an introvert, and I've been told, like, you don't come across as an introvert at all, and I'm like, yeah, that's called masking.
Easily.
So
Yeah.
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 Um, but
Huh.
that doesn't mean that I don't experience those social challenges with autism, not with a customer, but internally with the organization. I
Hmm.
can mask. If you have me talking to a customer 24/7, I can mask with that customer, no problem. And because I know what the strategy is. I know what I need to do when I'm talking to that customer, what my goals
But
are,
it must be
where I need to.
draining, right? Energy
Oh
wise.
yeah,
Yeah.
oh yeah. But I was able to do that for a long time. I even worked at call centers, and like I was able to do it because I developed a system that got me the information I needed, and I ended up, the highest score. CSATs were fantastic. Then I started digging more into customer success and NPS and stuff, and started doing great there too. What was a struggle was internally. I can mess with the customer, it's a little harder with the organization. And so when I'm
Yeah,
talking
of
to my
course.
colleagues, when I'm talking to my leadership, uh, it can be difficult to translate those the way that allistic people are people who don't have autism. It's difficult to translate the way allistic people communicate into something I can process and then talk to my customer about it. And so, for example, that water cooler talk of like, what'd you do over the weekend?
Yeah. Small
I
talks.
might Yeah, I might overshare, because to me, when
Mm.
you ask me how I'm doing, I think you want to know.
But yeah, you also have the Latino side in you. And we
Yes,
as
yeah, I do.
Latinos, we also talk. So it's like that combination is explosive.
Exactly, exactly. And so, it can be difficult. Sometimes I'll ask a question, and it can be taken as me being combative. And
Hmm.
I'm really not trying to be. I'm really just trying to understand and map out in my head what it is that I'm being told. Like, the most big example I can remember is that I remember I kept getting stuck on this one topic, which was, we had a mobile app. Who was taking care of the reviews in the mobile app? I knew we were taking care of the reviews on the site. Who was handling the mobile app? And in a meeting that, probably looking back now, probably had nothing to do with that, I couldn't stop asking that, like, who's owning this? Who's owning this? But that was my autism getting stuck on, this is something that needs to be done. uh I need to know who is handling it so I can talk to them about it.
Right.
And um that was, to me, one of the most evident times of my autism, like, in full display, because, we had the CEO there, the head of
Mm,
product and success was leading the meeting. We had the entirety of leadership was in that meeting, and they all wanted to move on to the next topic in the slide. I couldn't.
right.
I was stuck on it. So yeah, and that can be, good or bad. It can make for a difficult interaction if people
Yeah.
don't know how to take it.
I guess, and that's the thing. Like, you now know that you have it, and it allows you to analyze stuff in a way that maybe you know what triggers it, or you know when you are, or maybe over communicating. Let's say, people, when someone says that they are artistic, maybe people will let them alone and will not interact anymore because of
Mhm.
things that we all have in our minds, because we are ignorant, so we don't know about it. And when you told me about this, I was so curious that I started doing a research, and that's why I want to talk about this, because it's so important, not only for me as a person to know if I'm autistic or not. And even though if it's there's something negative, that negative, it might be for other people that don't have it, but it's actually positive things for you when you are focusing on something as well. And on the other side, your colleagues are the ones who are with you a lot of the time. How can we collaborate with my colleague? Like, you need a remote so you can have control in your environment. Let's give Jay the remote option because it's gonna be 120 productive. And
Yeah.
that's also with kids, like teachers, it might be difficult for them somehow to determine if someone is autistic or not. So that's really, really interesting, Jay, that you're giving us this, and also your experience.
Yeah. It's been and I will say there's pros and cons to being late diagnosed, you know. I grew up not having any resources given to me. Uh I remember, being in class and being assigned group projects, and I would do the whole group project, the classic nobody does anything, so I do it all. But I found myself constantly in that situation to a detrimental point. I remember once the most, and this probably should have been everybody's heads up in my family, I guess.
Mhm.
But I remember once I was I was in the car. I was in high school. I was in the car with my dad. We pulled up to school, and he just said, "I really wish you were like," and he compared me to my high school bully. And he was
Oh,
like, "I
wow.
really wish you were more like her." And I was like, "What the heck?" Like,
Yeah.
and then so he said, "So I got you something," and he got me Dale Carnegie's book of How to Make Friends and Influence People.
Oh,
And to me, that was such a that hurt so much. But
right.
I read that book anyway, and I took some things maybe a little too literally. That was a book written a while back, so it needs some adaptation to how modern society works with socialization. Um, but I had, like, again, this should have been everybody's hint. I had a notebook where I would write down my classmates and how they would interact, and I would write down like behavioral patterns I noticed, like, oh, there's a tone inflection when she talks to this person versus when she talks to this other person. She tucks her hair behind her ear when she's talking to her crush. Maybe that's how you can tell someone likes you.
You're focusing
You
on
know,
the environment.
and
Wow.
trying so hard to understand all these little interactions and how they connect with each other. And that's the pattern recognition in me that started my passion in psychology, my passion in behavioral analysis. But again, like, I could see all of this, but it's kind of like when you're trying to build a knockoff purse, and you don't have all the right materials, and you're like, I'm gonna make a Gucci purse, but I don't know how to make it Gucci. So you make something else entirely. That's what ended up in me.
Mhm.
And so after when I found out that I was autistic, I was still in denial for like a full year after I, ended up going like, oh, I am autistic. No.
The whole
And it
process.
wasn't a yeah, and it was a grieving process because um I had developed a mask that was so intense that to this day it's hard for me to drop the mask. Um and that's a mask that I developed as a way to survive the world because it was so different. Wasn't made with people like me in mind.
Right.
So, especially like growing up, for example, in Puerto Rico, growing up with people who were very, very sociable, very open, and saying something and the room goes quiet. And you're like, I know I messed up. I don't know how I messed up. So, and then like I remember getting the silent treatment on the ride back home if I was hanging out with like friends or family or something. And I was like, I don't know what I said wrong, but I know I said something wrong because I'm getting the silent treatment.
Exactly.
Um,
And that's exactly what I was referring, that sometimes like we are ignorant about a topic that we treat it, that we prefer not to treat it, or not
mhm.
to learn about it, or not to be curious enough. And I'm pretty sure I have made this mistake, and I will probably do it more than once. But I think that there are a lot of wrong ideas out there about something. And the first thing is about stereotypes. Like when I was in Costa Rica, the stereotypes that we have about Germans, right? And then now that I'm here, it's like, okay, I get it why, but it's the same. Like we are outside of the box and we are not wanting to maybe go in. And so it's like, okay, so yeah, like the silence treatment. Bye.
Yeah, exactly. And so, I mean, there's that con of, I'm there's a lot of mental stress that I have to take in order to navigate the world around me. Because again, it's not built for autistic people. It's not built with people like us in mind.
Mm-hmm.
But on the other hand, that makes me, there are other aspects of autism that I can use that are fantastic in my career. Because again, you think customer success, you think, oh, they have to be good at talking to people, they have to
Yeah.
be good at reading social cues. And so an autistic person can't do that. Well, the thing is, I can. I know I can. I'm masking, but when I talk to a customer, and on top of that, I lead a team. I have to be adaptable with
Mm.
people's communication styles. I have to be able to read, subtle changes in tone as much as possible. And what I do is that it might sound weird, but in my brain, I play it like it's a game of Clue, for example.
Okay. Okay.
And
What do you
so
mean?
I'll give you an example. We've had the most recently we had a customer who to me, based on just experience, I just had this gut feeling and I was like, this customer is gonna churn. They're gonna churn. Now, this customer had signed up for a new feature. They became what we call a customer success qualified lead. They signed up for a new feature that was going to bring more revenue to the organization. It was also going to help their workflow. They had been a longtime customer of ours. They were very interactive with our team, interactive with the product team. So nobody saw that they were going to be a churn, that they were a churn risk. And I was like, no, they're a churn risk. Here's why. And that's where I start putting in my pattern analysis. They're talking to the product team, but their interactions aren't about here's everything we love about the product. Their interactions are, oh man, I thought that you could do this. Oh dang, I thought you could do this. And I was like, they're not getting value out of the software. They're not getting value out of our product. We had them in our support chats constantly asking questions. And they were known as, our frequent flyers. Everybody was like, well, they're our frequent flyers. That means they're good to go, right? Because the team is giving them that hands-on help. And I'm like, the fact that they've been with us for so long and still need that hands-on help, that's a problem.
You're
That's not
analyzing it
good.
really deeply. That's why you are able to problem solve. And that's something I noticed as well when I was doing the research. That's right.
Yeah. And that's all part of for me, I take it beyond just a face value of you're a customer, I just want to talk to you and get you your value. I start analyzing like what aren't you telling me? Like you're
Mm-hmm.
saying you love our software. What aren't you telling me? Where could we do better? And the latest thing which I've been experimenting with a lot more. I was really scared when I was doing renewals or doing upsell, cross sell, anything like that. I was so terrified of just asking the customer directly, if you had to renew today, would you? Because I was afraid that the answer was going to be no. And that,
Then all the
and
alarms.
exactly. And I was like, oh no, that means that I'm going to have to figure out how urgent is this? Are they going to turn, what's going on? And then when I started seeing other CS leaders as well going like, try to pose that question, see what happens. And they seemed kind of like, do it out of curiosity. And I did it. You know what? I'm going to do it. I'm going to ask this to our customers, but I'm going to go even deeper.
Wow.
So for example, when I'm doing a success planning with my customers, I'm asking, let's say it's this day, you're renewing today. What would stop you from renewing? Or what stops you from renewing? Do you have hesitations? Tell me, I want to know. And then when they say, I've heard customers say like, no, we'd renew. And I'm like, okay, great. Tell me what's going right. Why would you renew? What are you getting out of this that you want to renew? And that makes them think. I've had customers be like, you know what, actually, on that note, I really would like if the software could do XYZ. And I'm like, why? Why would you want it to do XYZ? What's your goal with that? And I've had customers say like, oh well, we're switching between screens a little too much and just it makes our work harder to do. It's not a big deal. And I'm like, that's a big deal because that's our company goal is to make sure you don't have to do that. So now I know what to bring to internally to like, this is why they need it this way. This is how urgent it is.
And a lot of
And
times,
I've
and a lot of times we wish to have that way of analyzing stuff to solve things. We talk a lot about how to be able to collect the feedback, how to be able to make our customers do X, Y, and Z, how to avoid churn, renewals. But it's because sometimes we don't have those skills that you have as well, Jay. And now we're focusing on the autistic side. And I'm not sure, maybe that's something that you have just by default, or is it because of that? But that's a big con that you have that helps you exceed on that sense. And also, and something that we're going to talk about is the visual side of things.
Mhm.
But as per what I learned as a good nerd, is that doesn't necessarily mean for everyone who is autistic that the visual will help. But in your case, it
Right.
helps, right?
Yeah, and that was part of I found that was part of why I love art and I went into art. I love design. I love art. To this day, I still paint, I still draw. And when I studied digital animation, I made up I was super in love with comics.
Mm,
Um, and what I loved about comics, what really fascinated me is how you could take just pictures and put them in a certain sequence, and depending on how you drew the picture, how the text, like if you have the little text bubble, how the text looks in that bubble, how the bubble looks can define to you what the environment in that story is.
mm,
And so what I ended up doing is even as I was growing up, the way that my mind works is I mind map everything. Everything has a relation to something else, and I've had this conversation with my own family, with coworkers, where they're like, you find relationships between two different ideas that I can't understand how they're related. And I have to walk them through like A, B, C, D. But that's part of how my autistic brain processes things. It's if I tell you, for example, think of a flower, most holistic people might think of, okay, I'll think of a flower, and maybe they'll think of like different types of flowers or something like that, right?
yeah.
I think of a memory. So I think like, well, out in the front porch, I have wild morning glories. Wild morning glories are a white flower. I prefer violet flowers, and I remember that I went shopping for violet flowers. I now have carnations in my office because I went out to look for flowers. And so it's like that. What does me going shopping have to do with flowers? Well, that's the step by step that I take. But I do that fast. I don't do that in like, oh, it takes me a few minutes. That's how my brain goes, immediately mapping it out.
Interesting, interesting. And that helps you as well into how to map visually and that's what we're going to touch in a couple of minutes, into how you can visually also collaborate internally with your teammates to bring ideas, because
Hmm.
you have had really good ideas. And it's like, how do you present that internally to change the mindset of someone, right? And so it's really interesting that you're sharing this with us. Jay, thank you very much for openly sharing this in a genuine way. And it's time to start talking about the power of visual communication in customer success. We're improvising here, Jay, because I think that it is really important for everyone to hear your story when it comes to autism. And maybe they have questions, reach out. But this is the end of part one. And then stay with us, because part two is going to be all about tactical, digestible, and to how Jay actually uses the visual side of communication to help stakeholders. So stay tuned. And if you're thinking that you're not creative to do this, you never know. So stay with us.